So this is why the second, more profound aspect of the Dhamma is getting out of the whole cycle of birth and death, completely leaving samsara behind, making an end of suffering, making an end of rebirth and death. Now, this is the more profound aspect of the Buddha's teaching. Now you find that all religions, as far as I know, they're also teaching improving our karmic situation, avoiding bad karma. They may not call it karma, they may not operate with the concept of karma, but they all teach certain ethical standards. They all teach, to my knowledge, generosity, kindness, compassion, and things like that. But what is unique in the teaching of the Buddha is that he has found the escape from the whole universe of constructed phenomena, from the universe of sankharas. But the second practice is a bit more difficult. Maybe not just a bit, the second one is clearly the more difficult. And I'm always happy when people take that up and people take that on, when they start training their mind in that direction. I have to make a correction, because you were asking last time about the gradual training. And the one I've forgotten was the Sampajāna-kārī, acting with mindfulness and clear awareness. Now we were talking about the gradual training which the Buddha has expounded in countless suttas. It's sometimes not so apparent how important it is, because nowadays the editions usually are abbreviated. For example, if we look at the collection called the Long Discourses of the Buddha, which is traditionally put first in the canon, you find that the more than a dozen of the first suttas all start with a very, very long exposition on virtue, on all the rules the monks are keeping. And then, except for the first one, all the other ones from number 2 onwards continue with a very detailed exposition of what is known as the gradual training, Anupubba-sikkha. And again, in great detail with many beautiful similes. But of course, if understandably, when you print a book, you wouldn't want to print verbatim so many pages for a dozen suttas. But the danger is that we end up not fully appreciating the importance. So it's clearly really important. And the same pattern comes up repeatedly also in the middle-length discourses, and there's, I think, one also in the Anguttara Nikāya, expounding the gradual training. The monks obviously don't have the practice of generosity, because they're depending on generosity. For the monks, the job is to be very frugal and to be easy to look after, to have minimal possessions, and then to be incredible frugal in using the offerings and resources of the lay community who are supporting them. It's a beautiful simile in the Dhammapada. Now, ideally, the monk should go arms round in the village, just like a bee is flying among the flowers. The bee is actually taking a bit of nectar from the flowers, but the flower doesn't mind that. And it has even a helpful biological function for the flowers. And so similar, if a monk lives frugally and goes on alms round, that usually doesn't impose any big burden on anyone. But has the effect that if it's not even an outright extensive teaching, but just the presence of a samana, someone who has renounced the world, and who has that lifestyle, there's usually a big impact. I noticed that when I lived for 2 months in Boondala, in the south of Sri Lanka. There's a very ancient village. The village is already 2,000 years ago attested. And they actually did also have a little temple. There was also a temple monk. And then this kuti, which was done by a Western monk in the 1950s already. And usually you don't do any teaching or any rituals. I just had a roster where you would go to one house of those people who actually wanted to do that. Through the months, revolving roster. So it wasn't the traditional alms round where you walk through the whole village and anyone comes. But they had arranged that it's one house you go to, and you just sit in the front porch. They offer, and then I go back to the kuti, and they're very happy with it. But what I found remarkable after living there for a month, you notice that you have a really strong presence, and everyone knows you. I mean, of course, it's also a bit conspicuous that it's a Western monk, and that has a kind of bigger impact. But it's very, very remarkable how everyone in the village knows you, how you're being noticed. And I could really feel that it made a major difference for them, having me there. And also already noticing the influence from the other monk who invited me to stay for 2 months while he was traveling somewhere else. So Buddhist monks don't have the practice of giving generosity of material things, but being frugal in their own use of things. But they have a very extensive training in virtue. And the interesting part now is once the training in virtue is well established, there's already the first beautiful simile the Buddha gives. Do you know that one? What is the simile of a monk well established in the Patimokkha, well established in the rules the Buddha has given for monks? How he feels. He feels like a duly anointed Khattiya king. So like being a king who has gone through the coronation ceremony and all the rituals, and who is undisputed, unchallenged, and by everyone accepted in his position. That is that feeling of abhaya, of fearlessness, of certainty, of assuredness. In fact, the Buddha pointed out that a person who is truly virtuous will, for example, have very little anxiety when it comes to public appearances. If we have a bad conscience and we feel we are guilty, the wicked flee where no man pursueth. I think that's a saying in the Bible. And one doesn't have this confidence. So the Buddha, I think, wanted to express this internal confidence and assuredness which one achieves by keeping good virtue, by knowing that one is not harming either oneself or other beings. But now comes the training which goes beyond just making good karma, ensuring a good rebirth and so on, the more profound aspect. And we had last time talking about sense restraint, guarding the doors of the senses, Indriya-saṃvara, Indriya-gutta-dvara. And the other exercises are contentment. In the case of a monk, the simile is just like a bird is content to fly only with its wings and feathers. So a good monk should just go anywhere and be content with his robes and bowl, and then the alms food he receives. But contentment is also a good practice in lay life. It is said that contentment is the greatest wealth. A content beggar is happier than a discontent king. So sense restraint, contentment, and the third one was the Sampajāna-kārī. Have you heard that already somewhere else? It's also an exercise in acting with mindfulness and clear awareness. It's one of the Satipatthana exercises, the foundations of mindfulness, an exercise given under the first foundation of mindfulness, mindfulness of the body. And it's described, again, the Buddha uses a monk here as an example, that the monk is mindful in all bodily movements when flexing or extending the arms and legs, the limbs, when getting up or sitting down, when lying, when falling asleep and awaking, when eating or drinking, when looking here or there, doing all bodily movements with mindfulness and full awareness. There's quite a few exercises in Satipatthana, but this one is one of the few which are mentioned as a crucial practice between having established oneself in the virtue, in this case for monks, the whole vinaya the Buddha laid down, and then overcoming the 5 hindrances and developing samadhi, completing the second training, the training in the higher mind, Adhicitta-sikkha, which is the training in samadhi, samatha. And the interesting ones we've been talking about is what is in between that, having established oneself firmly in virtue, and now doing exercises in solitude to overcome the hindrances and develop samadhi. And in the main pattern in Digha Nikaya is these 3 which are mentioned. And my apologies, I forgot the one which is about not forgetting, about sati. So sense restraint, really important. Contentment, and learning to do all bodily movements with real awareness. Interestingly, there's a variation in some other suttas. The Buddha mentions also sense restraint, but then he substitutes for 2 other qualities, and that is Jāgariyam-anuyutta. Jāgariyam-anuyutta. Do you know Jāgariya? Jāgariyam is wakefulness. Because sleep is one of the big attachments, big defilements, laziness, taking it easy, relaxing. Is a koala still at the kitchen there? Still hanging there, yeah. I put that out because on Friday we went for an outing. A picture, it's only a picture, not a real koala. Goodness, not a real, no. Sorry. Is that still there at the entrance? Okay. A koala wouldn't be exactly the creature we should emulate. It's a bit too relaxed and a bit too much sleeping. And it's a very deep thing and very difficult to overcome. And it tends to get more difficult once you practice sense restraint, because you don't have all these exciting stimulations anymore. So it's even more important to practice devoted to wakefulness, and it's simply described that one is purifying the mind of all defiled states like anger or desire, laziness and conceit, and jealousy and stubbornness, distractiveness, muddle-mindedness, and so on, the whole list. And one sits and walks, purifying the mind from these states, except for the middle watch of the night, where one falls asleep mindfully, having directed one's awareness to the moment of waking. It's obviously quite a difficult practice. And it's fascinating that the Buddha doesn't describe any details there, but just the main gist, what meditation is all about, is sitting and walking to purify the mind from these defiled states. So it's really important not to lose sight of that. We sometimes can become too obsessed with our meditation object, trying to stick with it, to force the mind staying with that meditation object. Or we may even become overly obsessed with kind of formally sitting in particular and formally walking. But if we are doing that and we have just some fantasies we are entertaining, or we are sitting there and steaming with resentment about something someone did to us, it doesn't really matter that we are sitting. It's not a practice that is suitable for overcoming and abandoning the defiled states. So it's very important to always tune back in and check that out, what I'm doing there, sitting, walking, my formal meditation. Does it actually serve the purpose of reducing these unwholesome mind states? And the other one is Bhojanasmiṃ Mattaññutā. Bhojana is food. Do you know Mattaññutā? Matta is a measure, and anyun is a term for knowledge, for knowing the right measure. So these are two exercises which go to these very basic desires. This is taught to monks, so abstention from sensuality in a celibate life is already implied. That's why it's not mentioned anymore. That is already there in the training in virtue. And then the other two most basic biological desires, food and sleep, being addressed here. And we can see if we not addressing them to some extent and work with that, it will be difficult to go for the deeper practice of samadhi, and then even deeper, the third one, the training in higher wisdom. So it's a good thing to contemplate, in particular if you're on 8 precepts, because that is the idea of 8 precepts, to facilitate these exercises we are talking about. Sense restraint, mindfulness and clear awareness in all bodily movements and postures, contentment. For example, you're content with only the meal at noon, content without dinner, and then working on these two, wakefulness, sleeping little, and putting forth this continuous effort of purifying the mind. And the other one, contemplating food. How do you contemplate food? Do you know that little formula? We haven't got that included in our chanting. Patisankha yoniso pindapatam patisevami nevadavaya namadaya namandanaya. I will eat the alms food with careful reflection, not for fun, not for nice taste, not for indulgence, not for beautification, and not for developing a strong, athletic or attractive body. Only to sustain this body, so that one can continue the practice. And one contemplates and one eats to abandon the old feeling, that's a feeling of hunger. And one makes sure that one doesn't create a new Vedana, namely the Vedana of being overfull. So that one can strive on blamelessly and at ease. That's a typical contemplation monks and nuns are encouraged before they eat. Is one reason why monks usually eat separate, because in lay life, usually food has all kinds of functions, social function, cultural function, in particular for fun and enjoyment, talking, distraction. The monks even have words that one should have the eyes downcast, focused on the bowl, and then eating mindfully. What I strongly recommend it when you're on 8 precepts, that is a good time to tackle these deep-seated biological defilements. The one for sleep and food are particularly difficult because you can't stop doing that at all. One cannot completely cut it out. One can live the celibate life, that is quite healthy even, but you can't really live without eating or sleeping. And in general, it is much easier if you want to abandon something, an attachment to something, if you can give it away completely. It's much more difficult to do something every single day and try to do it without attachment, and abandoning the attachment while actually doing that thing is much more difficult. So one way of tackling is reducing it. This is why you don't eat in the evening on 8 precepts. This is why the monks put it all in one bowl. Usually we don't take second helpings. Reducing the whole elaborate, complex theater around food and all this stuff there. So the idea is that one eats food like medicine. Do you usually take antibiotics according to taste? You eat the antibiotics or the pills. You go into the pharmacy and then they have, like sometimes they have these things like tasting. You can just test or have a little bit. And they offer you some heart pills and some chemo, and you try out which tastes nice, and then you buy a lot of the pills which taste the nicest. Is that what you do? No, you get a prescription from the doctor and then you take it only according to the prescription, so that you can overcome that disease. So similar, one should regard food like that. Only to overcome that hunger and weakness, make the body strong again, that you can practice. But don't put so much in that you're tired and noddy and end up like the koala on that photo. We had an outing on Friday, and I thought when someone comes later at noon and they don't know about it, because we also had a problem with our website that just disabled our calendar app. So the calendar was also not working, people wouldn't be able to check it. Then I thought when they arrive, at least they have a cute koala to console them that they come here and then there are no monks here. But the Dhamma practice is not about being cute. It's about abandoning laziness and weakening the attachment to sleep and lolling about. And do you do these reflections about food? Have you tried?
During the Saturdays, which are on top of what you mentioned about food merits for the lay people.
Exactly. No, that is a typical reflection for monks. But when you come here, even if you bring some food on your own and put it out as an offering, you usually eat also the food other people offer. So you become a bit of an almsman or almswoman. On that day, you sustain yourself with alms food, which is offered for spiritual purposes with generosity. It's a particularly important reflection for monks, because if you're on the receiving end of that all the time, one can easily become complacent or take it for granted. So it's a very good reflection to think that this food is given sometimes with considerable sacrifice and certainly with a lot of devotion and effort. And now how do you become worthy of that food? By saying thank you 20 times. Thank you so much, thank you much. Is that how you can reciprocate? What did the Buddha say? Exactly. Again, this is particular for monks. The Buddha didn't want the monks to be, how to say, in a super ingratiating to those who give them not only food, but everything we need to depend on. But what the Buddha encouraged us to reflect on that and to reciprocate by making the best possible effort to keep the precept, develop sense restraint, develop contentment, develop mindfulness and clear awareness in all movements, develop devotion to wakefulness, develop knowing the right measure when eating, and then working to diminish the 5 hindrances, unify the mind in samadhi, and develop wisdom and insight to understand the Four Noble Truths and abandon the asaras. This is the only thing where you can really reciprocate. Yeah, very good reflection, Sadhu. And if you notice that in the evening when you get tired, because you don't have dinner and you're still running on the alms food you received at noon, then you would feel, I shouldn't sleep, I should be worthy of that alms food. Any other reflections? The one reflection I like to think about regarding overcoming attachment to food, just imagine you were to collect all the food you eat in a lifetime. Imagine, you always take twice what you eat, and then you just put that in one big container. You would end up with this gigantic container of food. And then just imagine all the stuff which comes out the other end, the defecation which we produce in one lifetime. And the process of sustaining a human body is turning a whole container of food into a whole container of excrement. This is an interesting way of looking at how human being, human body operates. It's quite a major part of the digestive tract. How long is it? Any medical doctors? 10 meters or something? Food going through. As long as a bus, so maybe more than 10 meters even. The other interesting contemplation is that food becomes unattractive the moment it's in contact with the body. Even the most attractive food, once it's in another person's mouth, we lose all interest in it. I'm not even talking about once the food is in the stomach. As I guess every one of you probably were sick at some time and you vomited. So we all, I think, have experience in what comes out if one vomits. And the fascinating thing is having this stuff in your stomach, what you see when you vomit in a bucket, having that in your stomach is what gives you this nice feeling which you feel right now in your stomach. Because it's good food here, isn't it? And if you're not tuned in, what is the feeling now inside your body, it feels quite nice and having a full stomach. You know that feeling, what I mean? Having had a really nice meal. But this feeling, this is the stuff which comes out when you vomit, the being in your stomach, that gives you that. It's not something particular noble and lofty and inspiring, isn't it? So why are we so attached to that? Why do we make such a big thing out of that? Have you tried to work with overcoming laziness and sleepiness? Do you sometimes stay up all night? Ajahn Chah had that as a regular practice, all 1 par, all 4 moon phases, basically once a week. The whole Sangha had to stay up all night. Have you ever tried? You've probably all partied all night, no? Have you ever partied until dawn? In your whole life, never.
No, I can't stay that late.
Amazing.
It's a reason my eyes.
Yeah, probably, yeah. I've been always a diligent Buddhist. In a way, I know many people who have done that, and it's quite easy somehow when you party. But now staying up all night when one tries to abandon defiled mind states and develop good and wholesome ones is amazingly difficult, isn't it? Have you ever called the bluff of sleepiness? Because it's a good experience to push through it, because it can feel so incredible, powerful, and you think, no, this is not a defilement, I really need to sleep now. You know that feeling when you meditate and then your body and mind seems to be telling you, this can't be good if I stay awake, no, I have to rest. It's much healthier and better for my health and well-being and for the well-being of all beings if I crash out now like this koala on that photo as a service to all humankind. And then interestingly, if you decide that you stop meditating and maybe you watch a bit the news, and suddenly the tiredness is completely gone. Now, the moment you decide to do more like something you're interested in, you no longer try to meditate, and suddenly the tiredness is gone. So we can recognize from that it was obviously not a real physiological need in that case. Because otherwise, it wouldn't matter what you're now doing, you would be tired. Another simile I sometimes bring to mind, imagine that you're nodding and you're nodding away in your meditation and you think, I really have to sleep. In that moment, as someone breaks into your home, and suddenly you have got this gangster with a gun standing in front of you. And I'm not wishing that to anyone, and may you never have a break-in, may no gangster ever threaten you. But if it happened, for example, to me, I would know for sure I wouldn't be sleepy. The moment someone comes in at night and points a gun at me, I never had that experience, but I can tell you with certainty, I would be wide awake. The moment your life is threatened, there would be no tiredness. And sometimes even death contemplation can hopefully cause that. That's one of the things that can overcome tiredness, the contemplating death. But sometimes it also goes away. You go through this kind of dead end point, and even if you do not do something indulgent, you just keep going and maybe getting up and start walking, and sometimes you notice that you come out of it and the mind becomes bright again. These experiences are very helpful to become mindful of the fact that it's often a bluff, and even though it feels I really have to sleep, then maybe it's actually not that important. Of course, you can also try with eating. Many monks, Dhamma often recommended that. One can sometimes try fasting. When you notice that, you go to the buffet, and you notice you really want to help yourself with the sweets and looking forward to eating, just decide, just don't eat anything. You're not going to die from not eating a day. Have you ever done it? Have you ever fasted at least for a day? I think it's a useful experience to do some fasting, because in our society we actually don't know hunger. We only know having a good appetite. When people say they are hungry, this is usually not real hunger. When people are really hungry, it's a very different feeling. And it can be an interesting experience to reject and not follow such a powerful, instinctive, biological urge. Sleeping, eating, and sensual desire There are these most basic and biological urges, and it can be a great exercise to simply say, okay, no, I don't do it. This is really character building. I remember once reading a book about emotional intelligence. I think we have it in the library. And they were describing these experiments where they had little kids. And they would give, or they would have the kid on a table, and then they would put one marshmallow in front of the kid. And they would say, okay, now I have to go out for a moment. If you don't eat the marshmallow, you get 3 when I come back in 5 minutes. and then they would actually record the kids. And there would be these funny videos how the little kid is struggling, trying not to eat the marshmallow, so that they would get 3 when the researcher comes back. And some would try to close their eyes. And some just couldn't do it. Some would immediately, the moment the researcher goes out, they would grab the thing and gobble it down. And fascinatingly, that was apparently in a very long-term study, and they found that the highest correlation for success later in life was the ability to delay gratification, to say no to gratification. And I mean, there's always different studies, and it doesn't mean it's 100% truth. But at least in this study, they claimed that it had a higher correlation to success, however they measured that, I'm not sure, than even IQ or the marks in school. It had a higher correlation. So it's very character building, not to deny these very strong urges voluntarily. And even if we can't let go yet, and it's done only with kind of endurance, it's still very good in terms of building character. So yeah, maybe as a little encouragement, when you're on 8 precepts, look into these things: sense restraint, mindfulness, and clear awareness, and then all bodily movements. Contentment, and contentment is a really good one in general. And then devoted to wakefulness, fighting that deep biological attachment to sleeping, lolling about, laziness, koala-ness, and knowing the measure when eating and reflecting on what that actually is, the attachment to food. The Buddha said, if you understand just one thing, is sufficient as a meditation object to attain full nibbana. What is that one thing? So if you say 4 Noble Truths, that's too much for me. I can't understand 4 truths. It's a little bit too much. I can maybe manage to understand one thing. No, sati alone wouldn't bring you to nibbana. It's an important quality, but it's only one of the factors in the Eightfold Path. There's nutriment. If you understand nutriment, if you fully comprehend nutriment, and there's a meditation object which is suitable to, in itself, to fully attain nibbana, and to understand edible food. The nutriment is a little bit wider; it includes other things, 4 nutriments, but even the first one, edible food, the food we eat as human beings, fully understanding that would be the 3rd stage of awakening, non-returning. So it's a very fruitful area of investigation. Food for the heart, yes. Contemplating edible food is food for the heart, for deepening the wisdom and understanding. And I'd like to open up any comments, questions. Yeah.
Practice mindfulness continuously.
No, but there's no trick. There's something which you develop gradually. Be in the present moment and establish mindfulness. And whenever mindfulness gets lost, we have to notice as quickly as possible. And then we have to re-establish it. And when we re-establish mindfulness, we need to have this endless patience to do that again and again and again. And we shouldn't blame ourselves or lose courage. Sometimes it may take 3 days till the mindfulness is fully back. But better it comes back after 3 days and never. At other occasions, you may get overwhelmed by some strong emotion, fantasies, ideas. It may take an hour, or it may take a couple of minutes. Or you may be becoming really good and re-establishing mindfulness. So usually it's not a matter of being able to do continuous mindfulness, unless that usually goes together with samadhi. That kind of mindfulness will be requiring the support from samadhi usually. Before that, it's more a process. How good are you in recatching your mindfulness very quickly? And the kind of ability to have a continuous mindfulness for longer periods is usually dependent on samadhi, and is one of the effects of samadhi. Now, the fourth jhana is called Upekkha Sati Parisuddhiṃ, the purification, the culmination of equanimity and mindfulness. So usually until these two will support each other. The four satipatthana are the samadhi nimittas. And the result of samadhi is that the mindfulness becomes stronger. So to really get into that, you have to bring in samadhi. And then they will support each other. But with a kind of normal mind, even if you're already trained in Buddhism, you usually will not be able to have really, really high mindfulness continuously for long periods. It's more a matter of bringing it back quickly enough. And then you try to be on a suitable meditation object. And it's usually the joy and happiness with the meditation object that allows you to keep the mindfulness on it. Now the question is, what distracts your mindfulness? And it's usually defilements. You think of something that upsets you, you think of something that excites you. Some old hurt, some worry, some anxiety. This is usually how we lose mindfulness, because the defilements are pulling our mind in all directions. But if you have a suitable meditation object and you develop that joy and happiness, then it's becoming easy to keep the mindfulness on that meditation object. And once the mind can unify in samadhi and jhana, then even after coming out of that, then usually mindfulness can be sustained much, much longer and more successfully. Which enables you to really see things as they truly are, and to really investigate with continuity and depth, so that the insight can become deep enough, profound enough that defilements are being destroyed. Now the other things we have talked about, you will find that the stuff we talked about will help mindfulness being stronger. I'm sorry for bringing up the koala again, but does he look very mindful? And if you're sleeping, you're not mindful, it's the opposite. So if one makes an effort in overcoming sleepiness and reducing the indulgence with sleep, it strengthens your mindfulness. If you eat a huge portion of your favorite food, are you particularly mindful after that? The big belly, and usually not. No? If we eat a lot, we are the opposite. The other one, sense restraint. If you go into the shopping center and you listen at the same time to a very loud earphone music, exciting music, and while you're looking around in the shopping center, you are eating an ice cream, and maybe additionally have a conversation, exciting conversation with someone, will you be very mindful? Probably not, or at least not quite the mindfulness the Buddha mentioned. To do all these things I mentioned together, you probably need a certain amount of mindfulness. As you end up putting the ice cream into your ear and eating your headphones or something, but no, it's not the mindfulness the Buddha mentioned. So sense restraint, a higher sense restraint, strengthens mindfulness. Contentment, a content person is obviously more mindful than a discontent one. A discontent one is always washing around and looking for something, whereas the content person will be easier to have mindfulness. So all the things we discussed are helpful for strengthening the faculty of mindfulness. In particular in the good precepts. In a sense, you already need a decent level of mindfulness usually to even maintain a really good precept. So keeping precepts is also training for strengthening mindfulness. And then having pure precepts for a longer period will make the mind much, much clearer. And the most obvious is clearly alcohol. When we break the fifth precept, then obviously the mindfulness will be very weak. But all of them have an effect. So very good question, yeah. So all these things we talked about help to strengthen mindfulness. But to really have mindfulness for long periods, it has to be in combination with samadhi. So that, because samadhi suppresses the five hindrances. And it's the five hindrances which will prevent us from having the mindfulness really continuous.